Okay, welcome to Faith and Calm. This is class number 160, and we are 2 days or 2 or 3 days, 2 days in front before Gimel Tammuz. What is Gimel Tammuz? Gimel Tammuz is a big day on the Chabad calendar. Originally, it was mostly connected with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who coming out from being released from prison under death sentence. They planned to kill him the instant they brought him into the prison. He was in Leningrad, Petrograd, and it's now called, and used to be called Petrograd. Then it was called Leningrad. Now it's called Petrograd again, Petersburg, and he was under death sentence for spreading Yiddishkeit, and it was a miraculous thing. He was in prison for 18 days, and he never expected to be able to get out because basically there were firing squads every night, and they just there was that was the height of the Stalinistic purges, and it was just terrible in Russia. It was just awful. And there was just just a reign of complete terror, and you never knew what was going to come next. So it was amazing that he got out. And he was beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten. One story, I'll just tell you one story about him in the prison, which was he never gave them any importance, any control over him. He always saw this entire situation as something that is a process that you have to go through from God, and it really had nothing to do with the communists or the whole situation. As my wife told the beautiful story she heard from one of her girlfriends this week, which was the story was about somebody who had a butterfly. Well, we're seeing a butterfly launch from the chrysalis. And if you know anything, there's a caterpillar, it goes into its cocoon, it spins its web, and then it comes out, it breaks out, and it comes out as a butterfly. So this guy was watching this chrysalis. The chrysalis is for butterflies, cocoons are for moths. Anyway, so he saw the the caterpillar struggling to get out, and he figured he felt sorry for it, so he decided he would help and try and open it up a little bit himself, and the butterfly emerged. But the thing was that the butterfly was very deformed, and it was having a lot of trouble with its wings. And after a short period of time, it actually died. So later on, he went and asked one of his entomologist friends what happened here. And the answer is because the butterfly has to go through that process of working very hard. It takes the blood out of its head and it brings it into the wings, and therefore its wings become stronger that way. And if it doesn't have that difficulty, it can't get through it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe saw the entire incarceration and the beatings as part of the process of destroying the Soviet Union, and he gave him no respect. He just even when he was to be released, they came into his cell and they said, "You have to stand up. We have a report to give you." And the protocol was whenever they came in, you had to stand up, and then they would announce what they had to announce. And he said, "I'm not standing up." And he didn't know what they were going to say. And so they beat him. They beat him until he was unconscious. And then later on, they came back again and they said, "Stand up." And he said, "I'm not standing up." And they beat him again. And finally, the third time, they told him, "He's a rabbi. We have good news for you. You got to stand up." And he wasn't standing up. Finally, they said, "We're taking you to the office anyway." And they took him to the office and they announced his release. So that was the Frierdiker Rebbe, a previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Gimel Tammuz, many years later in 1994, that was the day, unfortunately, that the current Lubavitcher Rebbe, we don't.
His heart stopped.
Okay, good. That's a good way to say it. His heart stopped. I was there. I was in Crown Heights. I remember the whole situation. He was in the hospital in Manhattan, Beth Israel, and it was all the whole Shabbos Korach. We didn't know what was going on. And then we heard the news about 1 o'clock in the morning. So, and there was a funeral, and I was at it, and I was supposed to go out with a date on my wife. That's another story. And that was our first date together. We had to cancel that. And, but Chabad Hasidim know that life does not die, and death does not come to life. And the soul is alive. And therefore, the soul may be disconnected from the body, but there's never, ever a interruption in the life, in the soul. Therefore, the Rebbe is very much with us. So I wanted to explain a little bit. I've been listening to some very inspiring talks that sort of explain what is a Rebbe and what does it mean to have a Rebbe. And I think these are very faith-giving and confidence-giving because that's what a Rebbe is. The difference between a Rebbe and a rabbi is a rabbi, you go, we have intellectual questions. You want to know, how do you keep Shabbos? Can you do this? Can you do that? And there are different levels of understanding, and some rabbis know tremendous amount, and they can explain it very well, and they can tell you inspiring stories, and they can give you over good, interesting ideas, and they can help you understand this beautiful thing that we have, the Torah, and about Judaism, and about Jewish life, and explain what it's all about, and so forth and so on. That's a rabbi. A Rebbe is something else. A Rebbe is someone who basically shows a person what is truth, what is God. It makes you understand and see godliness in this world. Another way to say it is, a Rebbe gives a person emunah, faith. He gives him the person the understanding that you're not alone in the world, that there's a God, that he's good, and even when intellectually you cannot see what's happening to you is necessarily what positive. There is you can understand with your power of faith, because the Jews are called Aminim B'nei Ma'aminim. They are the believers and children of believers, and they understand that they're part of a bigger purpose and a bigger project, and it may not fit into one's head. And the Rebbe helps a person understand that in himself. He gives that over and he kindles it and he inspires a person in himself. There's a Jewish organization. They publish videos, and they published a video about this day, Gimel Tammuz, and they had a very good story in there that sort of captures a little bit of what a Rebbe is. It's a story about an advisor of Israeli prime ministers, who was an advisor for many prime ministers from the beginning of the state of Israel through Menachem Begin, and his name was Yehuda Avner. And Yehuda Avner was sent by Menachem Begin, especially many times as his representative, to talk to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he tells the following story. One time he was sitting talking to the Rebbe in the Rebbe's office, and he asked the Rebbe, what is a Rebbe? What's your job description? Who do you see yourself as? So the Rebbe opened the drawer, and he showed him some candles in the drawer. And he says, what are those? Okay, then Avner said, those are candles. This is actually not, the Rebbe told them, those are not candles. Those are pieces of wax with string. In order for it to be a candle, it has to be lit. If it's not lit, it's really not a candle, that's for a candle. So my job, the Rebbe said, is to make sure is that every Jew is a potential candle to shine and illuminate the world. And my job is to be like a lamplighter to help that Jew light up and glow in the world. So they talked about that a little bit. And when Yehuda Avner was leaving the room, he said, Rebbe, is my candle lit? And the Rebbe says, that's your job. So I give you the match into your hand, but you have to light your own candle. That, in a very short way, explains what a Rebbe is about. And every shliach of a Rebbe is about. We're not forcing people. American Jews, can't force them to do things. They all have their own opinions. We're very stubborn people. We can't be pushed into things. We can't be pushed into religion. We can't be pushed into, but you can show them and you can tell them what it's about. And you can put the match in their hand. And you can tell them this is really exciting, and this is really interesting, and this is really powerful, and this is the most important thing in life, and all the other things that you spend so much time on may not give you as much pleasure and happiness as being able to, and basically the energy to deal with all the difficulties that happen in the world. You can have all the money in the world and all the material success, and you can be very unhappy, as we can see. And Americans are very well off, and they're better off than many, many generations before. And yet, they're not. They're always. They got a lot of complaints and worries and fears and political and this and that. And the world is coming to an end. And you know, the Rebbe gives faith. The Rebbe gives emunah. The Rebbe gives a belief in that there's something bigger. There was a video that was made maybe 20 years ago, and it was explaining this idea about Jews and about faith. And the video was about Hanukkah. It's not Hanukkah now, but it was talking. It used the story of Hanukkah, and it said that there was a battle between the Greek Jews, the Jews following Greek philosophy, and the Jews who wanted to keep the old-fashioned religion, and that was Hanukkah. And in the story, it was for little kids. It was one of these cartoons, It used the metaphor of letters. It said in the video, there were these Greek letters that were powerful and strong and beautiful and well decorated, and materialistically they looked very good. And then there were the Hebrew letters in the alphabet, which were old and worn out, and were not so necessarily so good, but they had a glow, they had a light with them. And the character in the story there was a character in the story, a Jewish kid who had become a convert to the Greek philosophy, and he was carrying a sword and he was trying to get rid of this light because he was bothering him. Why do these letters shine? I want to get rid of that light. So he's using a sword. He was trying to get rid of that light, back and forth, back and forth. And the moral of the story was you can't get rid of the light because the light is godliness, the God is elokus, and materially things can be very nice and so forth, but there's a glow. And that's what the Rebbe did. The Rebbe gives his agents, and he continues to give the power to all of his agents in the field, us, our shluchim, and the shluchim, this ability to be able to light other people. And I'll tell one of my favorite stories about this. It was just somebody reminded me of the story because I heard it there. There was a Jewish professor not in Australia, but in an area called Tasmania. I don't know if you know where Tasmania is. Tasmania is an island, a big island, south of Melbourne, not far from Australia, and part of the Australian Commonwealth. Anyway, this Jew, his name was Hasofar. He was a professor, and his wife had gotten there. Now, who was he? Originally, he grew up in Egypt. He grew up in an atheistic family. He was a communist. He was a fervent communist and an atheist and secularist. And he got thrown out of Egypt for communist ideology. He went to Israel. He found his wife. He got married. Lived in a very secular kibbutz. He knew Hebrew very well. And then he moved to Tasmania. And one day, the president of the local congregation, there wasn't many Jews there, came to him and said, we have a problem. He says, we have services Friday night, and the guy who used to lead the services left, and you're the only person on the island who knows Hebrew. Can you pray for lead the services? And he said, what? So I'm a professor. I'm completely atheist. I dropped the communism, but I don't have anything to do with Judaism, So why me? He said, because you know Hebrew. so he had to lead the congregation. And, he started saying, this is sort of interesting stuff as he read it and he went over it. And he said, he said to his wife, we really should find out a little bit more about what it means to be a Jew. And so they tried, but there was nothing around. And finally, his wife and him, they begged. They said, God, there must be a leader of the Jewish people who can come and teach us what about Judaism. The next week, they're looking out the window and they see one of these guys with the hat and the coat and the beard and so forth. How'd you get here? What are you doing on our island? I never saw anybody look like you before. And somebody went, you're Jewish? Yeah. He didn't say who he was. His name was Gutnick, but he didn't tell him how he got there. Anyway, they pull him into the house. He starts explaining things, and they find it very interesting. And there's more and more classes later on. They move later on to Melbourne, and then they move later. Melbourne, I think. That was the bigger Jewish community, and they became religious. And later on, many years, they found out that Rabbi Gutnick got there because in the middle of the night, one day, the Rebbe called him and said, go to Tasmania. He didn't explain who he's going to see or who he's going to run into or whatever. He just here's your marching orders. You're one of my agents. You're a shliach of mine. Go there. So he went there. And sure enough, he met this Sofer. But it's not the end of the story. The daughter continues the story. Many years later, she says her father gets a call gets an offer to teach in Malaysia. Now, Malaysia is a very Muslim country, so he wrote the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he said, what should I do? And the Rebbe wrote back and said, do you take that job? And you stay there for the 9 months, and you'll be my agent to talk to any Jews. So he goes. The only thing is, he stays there for 9 months and he never found a Jew. He never found a Jew. He talked to this nice Muslim guy, and he was, no, I'm sorry, I think a Buddhist guy, Mehmet or something like that. And the guy liked very much the Hasidic philosophy and these ideas, and found it was very interesting, but he never found a Jew. He comes back home and he figures he doesn't know what he was doing there and why he was there, but he followed orders. Not that long after that, he gets a call from a girl, and she comes and she explains. She says, that she had traveled to Malaysia specifically to be a student of this Buddhist monk priest. And when she got there, he asked her, "What's your religion?" And she said, "Jewish." And he says, "You don't need to come here. You have better sources of information than I could possibly give you for you as a Jew. Go to Melbourne. There's a Jew there named Hasofar, and he'll connect you with the Jewish community. I talked to him. He's a great person." So he says, she says, "That's why I'm here." So he realized the Rebbe didn't see why he was supposed to go there. It was for this girl, although it had to come through this indirect way, which is what life is all about. It doesn't happen in a linear process and so forth. And she now has a Jewish family, and she has kids, and she raises them, and the whole thing was just one person lights another candle, inspires another person. In fact, the daughter tells and finishes the story with another story, which is one time her mother, this is Mrs. Hasofar, she was in Crown Heights, and she told the Rebbe she's very upset. She had a miscarriage a few years before, and she wants to have another child, and she doesn't see it ever happening. And on top of that, she also wants to connect to all the Lubavitcher Rebbes, but she can't connect to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe very easily. It looks too, whatever. So the Rebbe had a big smile, and he said, "Very soon you will find a connection with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, my shver." And guess what? My father-in-law. So the next year, this girl, Racheli Hasofer, was born on Yud Shvat. So then, which is the day that the Yud Shvat is the yahrzeit of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. So she did have a connection. And so it goes on. And so it goes on. One candle lighting another candle. And this is the Rebbe. This is the Rebbe's inyan. The Rebbe's inyan is to inspire, to show people that there's godliness. Now, I was listening to Rebbe Paltiel, and he had a very interesting thing to say. He said there was this guy. He was giving this talk in one place about faith and about belief in God and so forth. And there was a guy there who had problems with it. And he asked the question. He said, "Listen, it seems like, this is all blind faith, and you have to turn off your mind in order to believe." And Rebbe Paltiel corrected him and said, "It's not blind faith, it's simple faith." And the guy had a lot of problem with it, because it seems like faith is somehow is opposite of thought, of intelligence. And I like this very much. Rebbe Paltiel said, the Rebbe, it comes from the Rebbe. The Rebbe has explained this many times in Sichos to us, and he says that understanding and intellect and our minds are one thing, and faith comes from it's a different sense. Just as you would not say that a person who's a talented musician or a talented painter is very smart. It's not smarts that he's conveying when he's very good at these things. It's a different skill set. It's a skill set that maybe he's smart and maybe intellectually aware and very cognitive, or maybe not. But he has developed the skill of being able to transmit through either music or through painting or through words or some other artistic means, deep concepts and so forth. Faith is just like that. In fact, faith works best when you do have a lot of knowledge. So it's not, but the problem is people want to be in control and they want to understand everything. And therefore they feel that when they're acting on faith, somehow it's contradictory to their sense of insecurity and their need to be in control, if I'm making sense. So that's not the case. The case is really that it takes a lot of courage and a lot of understanding to be a person of faith. And that's one thing that the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, said about her husband. She knew him very well. She was the daughter of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, so she knew what a Rebbe was. And she never, and when she was asked, what is the most special thing about your husband? She would say his faith, his emunah. Why? Why not his Avos Israel, his love for his fellow Jew? Why not his knowledge of Torah? Why not all these other things? And the fact is that because that's what a Rebbe is. He conveys faith. He gives faith. He gives understanding that there's a God. It's true. It's real. We're part of a bigger mission. Even if we can't figure it out and put it in our head and understand why these things are happening to us, nevertheless, there is all of this stuff is something about something bigger. And it is our job as people who have been touched by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who've been to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe, heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, to be able to explain this to other people, to be able to connect them to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Rebbe Paltiel tells an interesting story. And I was thinking about it too. He says, he used to go to what they call Fabrengens in 770. So a Fabrengen would be, the Rebbe would be speaking for several hours, and there would be several thousand people, men standing there, and women in the women's section and so forth like that. And the Rebbe would speak for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then there would be a small break, some singing, and then it would continue. During the singing period, there were people who, I wouldn't say smuggled in, but they brought in, because they were supposed to, bottles of wine and these little tiny little, cups, that like 1 ounce cups and stuff like that. And this would all get spread around the whole, the shul. And people were stacked, back to back, side to side, on top of each other, squished sometimes, depending on what season it was. It was Tishrei. It was impossible. Even in the summer, it was busy. It was a couple thousand people. And they would pour a little of wine, and they would hold it up, and they would go, L'chaim, Rebbe, L'chaim, to the Rebbe. And they would not drink it. They would not drink it until the Rebbe would make eye contact with you, and he would acknowledge you. And Rebbe would go around the room, looking and looking and looking and looking and looking and looking. And each person who would hold it up, they would say, and people always knew that the Rebbe's looking right at me. Not the guy next to me, not this guy. He got it. He's been acknowledged, but not me. I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. And they would wait until the Rebbe would have this eye contact with you, zoom in. And he made it personal. And he would connect with each person in the room. So another thing about the Rebbe's not a rock star, and he's not like the superhero. It was a very personal connection that he makes with every single Jew. He cares about each individual as an individual. And he had this ability because what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is not about himself, and it's not about his ego, and not about how great he is. It's all about the Hasidim. The Rebbe's whole focus was, my mission is to light other people. It has nothing to do about himself. It's all about us, the Hasidim. And I'll finish with this other story. It was also published about around these times, there was a gentleman who was involved in education, and he came in the 1970s, 75 or so, and he had a one-on-one conversation late at night with the Rebbe about all sorts of matters about education. Many years later, in the 1990s, there were no longer one-on-one conversations, but you could come for something called dollars. On Sundays and so forth, the Rebbe would hand out dollars. There would be several thousand people in line, and they would each one get about 35 seconds with the Rebbe. The Rebbe would give you $1, and he'd give you a bracha, and you'd go on the next place. So this guy came by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe stopped him, and the Rebbe continued the discussion that he had some 25 years earlier, 15 years, whatever years earlier, 1975, 80, 15 years earlier, exactly at the same point that he finished the conversation before. And the guy was blown away. He says, Rebbe, you're amazing. I mean, I didn't even remember what we were talking about, and you just continue the conversation. And the Rebbe says, what's so special if I'm amazing? The whole point of it is what's going to happen with Chinuch. So the Rebbe was not, that was how the Rebbe was people were able to relate to, and are able to relate to the Rebbe, is that he's not a being for himself. His whole function, his whole role is to be completely selfless and to care about leading the people, leading us, giving us the faith, giving us the trust. So I have more stories to tell, and I could continue to tell stories, but I want to give my wife some time. And I want to wish everybody a very special Gimel Tammuz. We should all learn what it means that we have a leader and he's watching over us, and he's now more capable of connecting with us than ever before. He's not limited to you have to go to Crown Heights. You can wherever you are, you can reach out, and the Rebbe is giving us inspiration and leadership. And yeah, I should stop at that point. Good. Okay, all right. And the lights have changed, and we're recording. Okay, good.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. Does anybody want to say anything before I begin? Okay, so I'll just begin. So, okay, I'll start out with the things that I always say, which is number one, we're in an extraordinary time. How do I know this? Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who never made a public pronouncement that didn't come true in my experience, told us that we are in the beginning of the redemption of the Jews and the entire world, the Geula. And Geula is Hebrew for redemption. And number two, our souls were handpicked to be here at this exciting juncture in Jewish history, world history. Number three, we were given all the tools we need to navigate this time. We were given the Torah, which is our guidebook, and we were given the mitzvahs, which are our power tools. And number four, what we're doing tonight, which is learning about Mashiach, actively advances the process of Mashiach. So, it is interesting that people ask, what happened on Gimel Thomas? And I'll just say very briefly, Yeheskel Shimon and I, our first date was scheduled. We hadn't met each other yet. Our first date was scheduled for Gimel Thomas, 1994. Anyway, and we didn't meet then. Yeheskel Shimon called me that morning to tell me what was going on. And we met 4 days later. But there's a different story about something that happened on Gimel Thomas. There was I'll just tell it very briefly because I haven't even thought about it for years. But there was maybe I'll save it for next week because I haven't prepared it. Or okay, I'll try. So on Gimel Thomas, there was this. I'm going to do it next week because it's such a good story that I don't want to blow it. And I have plenty to say this week anyway. So anyway, we just passed the 28th of Sivan. That was on Shabbos. And on the 28th of Sivan, that was the anniversary of the Rebbe coming to America with the Rebbitzin, our Rebbe and his wife. And so when he came to America, the previous Rebbe sent a delegation of people to go greet his son-in-law and his daughter. They had just escaped from the Nazis, right? And the Frierdiker Rebbe told the people who went, he said, you should know who you're going to greet. He knows this. I mean, he was an acknowledged world-class Torah genius, and had not only a genius but had tremendous. It's called hasmada. He applied himself to his learning. He would learn. He slept like 2 hours a night, maybe 2 to 3 hours a night, and he was constantly busy. The entire time that he worked in 770, the entire time that he was Rebbe, he never took a day of vacation. And once his doctors insisted, you must take a vacation. So he did this twice. He went up to the Catskills to see a Chabad camp, a boys' camp and a girls' camp, and he inspected the camp and he talked to the kids and stuff like that. That was his vacation. One day he took 2 days vacation in 40 years, and it wasn't a vacation. It was a mission. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about when the Rebbe came off the boat, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was then Rebbe, the previous Rebbe was then Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe was extraordinarily proud of his son-in-law. His son-in-law was a major genius, absolutely unbelievable genius, and an immense Torah scholar. But even though he was so proud of that, he immediately put the Rebbe to work because he knew the Rebbe's not going to be just a Torah genius. The Rebbe has to change. This guy and which I'm sure he knew even back then, he's going to succeed me. He's going to change the world. So he immediately put him to work. And the Rebbe, for his part, our Menachem Mendel, he also had an interesting dual relationship with his father-in-law. He worshipped his father-in-law, and when he came to America, when our Rebbe came to the America, probably he was around it was 1951, so the Rebbe was 49 years old, and his father-in-law was in his 60s. But his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, had been through heck and high water, and he had been thrown in prison, and he had been thrown down an iron stairwell, and he had guns. It had guns pointed at his head, and he had to, he was tortured, and he was sure he was not going to make it out of there. It was just absolute torture, and he took it upon himself, the Frierdiker Rebbe, to not acknowledge his the people who were imprisoning him, and that was that had to be a really tough cookie to do it. And he wasn't born a tough cookie. He made himself into he made himself do something that all of us have to do, which is to recognize that there's only one power in the world, and that is Hashem. And that's why he didn't acknowledge his captors. He didn't acknowledge them. He said, "There's only one being is going to decide what's happening to me, not you." And the Rebbe, our Rebbe, later on credited the Frierdiker Rebbe's strength in dealing with the Russians. He said that was the beginning of the crushing of Russia, and it flowered decades later in the release of the Soviet Jews. But the beginning of the breakdown of the communist regime was the Frierdiker Rebbe's ignoring them. Anyway, at that point, the entire family, at that point, the Frierdiker Rebbe's family was extraordinarily protective of him, because he had MS. He had already had a small stroke. He had been through heck and high water. He was like a little bit frail, I guess you'd say. And they were really protective of him. And the rest of the family didn't want anybody to come see him. They wanted, instead of, a Rebbe usually has a lot of people come to see him, and they didn't like it. And so they tried to get very, very few people to see it. They tried to prevent people from seeing him. Now, our Rebbe protected his father-in-law also. He read his mail, and if it was bad news, he didn't give it to the Rebbe, because the Frierdiker Rebbe was such a sensitive soul, and he didn't want to cause him stress, added stress. But on the other hand, our Rebbe, he did one thing that was totally not protective, and the whole family was against him about it. What did he do? He used to schlep people in to see the Rebbe, exactly what the rest of the family didn't want to happen. But our Rebbe knew that a Rebbe is not an island. A Rebbe's whole purpose is to ignite other Jews, and so he schlepped people in, because the most important thing for our Rebbe was, I need to connect these people to the Rebbe, connect to the Rebbe, connect to the Rebbe, connect to the Rebbe. And it's also good news. It's also a good advice for us. As much as we can connect to the Rebbe, we get more and more light, more and more chayus. Chayus is life, and it's a completely different life. It's just like the Rebbe is a generator, an energy generator. It's and it's like we plug in when you plug into the Rebbe. So I want to tell a little story about that was told. I saw it on a Gem video. I'm sorry I didn't write down the name. Maybe I'll if anybody's interested, they can contact me, and I'll get them the name after the talk. But the Rebbe was talking. It was a little video about what makes a Rebbe, and it's a very interesting thing. What's the training for a Rebbe? What's the proper training for a Rebbe? It's very instructive for the rest of us as well. And that's why this is where the title of tonight's program comes from: How to Love Somebody Who Drives You Nuts. So this is the training for a Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe that before the Frierdiker Rebbe, before the previous Rebbe was bar mitzvah, he went into his father, the Rebbe Rashab. I'm going to close the door because there's a little bit of noise out there. So he went into his father, who was the Rebbe Rashab. He was the Rebbe at the time, and the Rebbe Rashab said, "You're going to be bar mitzvah." He said, "You can ask me whatever you want." And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "I want to know why we say Hareini Mekabel Alai Mitzvahs Aseh Shel V'Ahavta L'Recha Kamocha before davening. Why is that so important before davening?" And many of us know the answer now because the Rebbe publicized it so much. So it's going to sound old hat to us, but it was a very good question that the Frierdiker Rebbe was asking, because Hareini Mekabel Alai means I am hereby taking it upon myself to love my fellow Jew as myself. And so that is, there are two kinds of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs bein adam lamakom. That means mitzvahs between a person and Hashem, our creator. And then there's another set of mitzvahs that are the good deeds that we have to do between us and our fellow person, and how we have to act in the world. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was asking, davening is all about connecting to Hashem. It's all about mitzvahs. It's bein adam l'chavero, between a person and his creator. Why are you schlepping in something that is bein adam l'makom into bein adam l'chavero, between a man and his friend? Why are you schlepping that? Why should that be the preface for davening, which is so clearly your relationship with Hashem? And his father told him that davening, when you daven, you're seeking something from Hashem very often. You're seeking to connect to Hashem. You're seeking a richer relationship. You're seeking maybe practical things. And if on this earthly, if you ask an earthly parent, if a kid wants something from his father, for example, what's the best way to get the thing that you want from your father? And the Rebbe Rashab said, if the father sees that his children, who are all very different from each other, if he sees them loving each other and getting along, it produces such an exquisite joy in the father that he's willing to give the children anything they want. So too, when we exhibit brotherly love towards our fellow Jew, it produces exquisite pleasure in Hashem, and he's willing to give us whatever we want. So this little video that I mentioned from Gem, Gem is they put out videos about the Rebbe, JEM. It's on YouTube. They have tons of nice videos. Right after they filmed the Rebbe saying that they put on the little film clip of the Rebbe telling people about what happened to the Frierdiker Rebbe right before his bar mitzvah. They segued to a little video of a little interview with Rabbi Label Posner. For those of us who are anyone who's a Bostonian who's listening, this is our Rabbi Shmuel Posner from Chabad of Kenmore Square. It's his father. And Rabbi Label Posner, sometimes they put on videos and they have these old Hasidim like Rabbi Label Posner talking, and you could eat them up alive, because the sweetness of an old Hasid or old Hasidic woman or old Hasidic man who is they're living their Torah. It's just like so sweet. You could eat these people. So anyway, he's one of these people who you could eat up. And he was explaining that when he was a kid, when he was a young man, a very young man, he actually he was called into the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe passed away in 1950. So this little tete-a-tete had to happen in the 1940s. And he was a young man, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was the Frierdiker was sending him and another young man to Pennsylvania to give out literature and about Judaism. And he knew that these young men are going to see people. They're young, frum men, and they're going to see people who are not religious. They're going to see Jews who are not religious, who are not doing, who are not dressing, talking, anything like they do. And so he wanted to prepare them. And he said, you know, it's customary. He said a good piece of advice that people talk about is that when you see another Jew, um, how you have to deal with him is that you have to see his good traits and not ignore his bad traits. You see his good traits, but you don't ignore his bad traits. And he said, however, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, however, Hasidim say that in the Torah there are two types of letters. Actually, there are three types of letters. There's the normal sized letters in the Torah, the normal, whatever, they'll probably like this, the normal sized letters in the Torah. And then there are bigger than normal letters. And then there are tiny letters. Not many of them, but there are bigger than normal letters and tiny letters. And he said that and the Frierdiker Rebbe said a person's good points you should see like the big letters, and their chisronos, their failings, you should see with the tiny letters, like the tiny letters. And 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 on this video, they go back to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe explains was that's a teaching that you see another Jew, you concentrate on his good stuff, and you know about the bad stuff, but it's very, very small for you. It's not your focus, it's not your concentration point. And the Rebbe said that was the preparation it was right before his bar mitzvah. He said that was his preparation for becoming a full-fledged Jew. And not only that, that was his preparation for becoming a Rebbe, to becoming a Nasi, the head of the Jewish people. So anyway, and if it's the preparation for a Nasi to become a Nasi, how much more so? How much the same for us. So they also showed a little film clip of somebody that it illustrates the same point, this incredibly important point of how to look at another Jew. That we look at the good stuff with huge letters, and we look at the bad stuff like tiny letters. And it's a story about a famous a famous Chabad Chassid. He's a shaliach. I don't know if he's still working. He would be very old at this point. His name is Shmuel Lu, and Shmuel Lu is a Chabad rabbi in England. He's not English. He's American, I believe, or maybe he's Australian. I don't know where he is. Anyway, but Shmuel Lu, he seems to have an American accent. He works in England. So he was talking to the Rebbe in 1974 in Yechidus, just him and the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, while they were talking, a name came up. And this person's whose name came up was somebody who had been extremely vocally critical of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's opinion about Mi HaYehudi. Now, what's Mi HaYehudi? Who is a Jew? So for thousands, ever since creation, there's been one definition for a Jew. A Jew is someone who's born to a Jewish mother, not a Jewish father, and it has to be a Jewish mother. The Jewish soul comes through a Jewish mother, or they've converted through halacha. They've converted through a stringent program of learning the Torah, of being tested by the rabbis, of being tested for their resolve in becoming Jewish. And they have to go to mikveh, and if he's a guy, he has to have a bris, the whole 9 yards. So anyway, so this guy was, it caused a big brouhaha in Israel because they were trying to lessen the standards for what is a Jew, and the Rebbe and other Torah authorities were extremely against this. So anyway, when that name came up of this guy who was horribly critical of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when the name came up in the conversation that Shmuel Lu was having with our Rebbe, Shmuel Lu is thinking to himself, wait a minute, that guy lives in England. He's thinking, when I get back to England, I'm going to straighten things out with that guy. And as he's thinking this thought, the Rebbe says, it's not a thought to go straighten things out with that guy. He had never said anything. And so Shmuel Lu says, I'm a little bit of a wise guy. So I figured as soon as Rebbe said that, I figured, I'll just tell somebody else to straighten him out. And the Rebbe said, and it's not a thought to send somebody else to straighten him out. And and uh, and the Rebbe continued, and he said, there are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. If he won't work with us on one of them, maybe he'll work with us on the other 612. And so and so the and so Shmuel Lu said he took this as a life direction, that when you're working with a Jew, another Jew, you look for the things that unify you. You don't look for the things that separate you. You look for the things that unify you. And it's a life direction. So, and the Rebbe continued, and he said that when, like, even if you're dealing with somebody who has never done a favor to you in your life, and it's very rare to find such a person. Usually the people that we're aggravated with, they've done favors for us. It's not just a one-way street. But even if you're dealing with somebody who has never done a favor for you, a Jew who's never done a favor for you, and there's senseless hatred going on. If your response is senseless love, ahavas chinam, which means it's not merited, it's just you just give senseless love, then it brings down the most enormous pleasure from Hashem, the most enormous pleasure, and Hashem is willing to pay us back with enormous good. So I want to say, since Thursday is going to be Gimel Tammuz, probably I'll say a little bit more about it in the next next week. But it's very interesting. If we want to know what Gimel Tammuz is, everybody's trying to define Gimel Tammuz. What is Gimel Tammuz? What happened on Gimel Tammuz? Remind me to tell you a great story about what happened on Gimel Tammuz. But if we're trying to understand what Gimel Tammuz is, then a good way to understand anything is to see what the Rebbe says about it. The Rebbe's, when I didn't become frum through Chabad. I didn't know a thing about the Rebbe. I became frum through another Orthodox group of people, and I loved Torah. As soon as I encountered Torah, I loved it. And it was 7 years. It was several years before I encountered Chabad. I loved Torah, but when I started learning the Rebbe's Torah, it was like the windows were thrown open. It was so broad, so beautiful, so wow. It was something else. So if I want to understand something, I try and find out what does the Rebbe say about it. And the Rebbe said, it's very interesting, 3 years before Gimel Tammuz 1994. Gimel Tammuz 1994 is when the Rebbe's heart stopped and they buried him. They buried his body. And the Rebbe gave, 3 years earlier, the Rebbe gave an entire talk on what is the meaning of Gimel Tammuz. Nobody ever made Gimel Tammuz into a big deal. And the Rebbe all of a sudden gave an entire sicha 3 years ahead of what would happen on Gimel Tammuz. And he said, we have to understand that Gimel Tammuz itself is a great day. And when somebody says something is a great day, when we talk about a great day in Judaism, every year, whatever happened on that day, the same kind of energy, the same spiritual energy repeats itself each year. That's why we celebrate Hanukkah each year on the same date, not as just a historic marker. It's because the same spiritual energy is in the world. When we have Rosh Hashanah each year, it's because the same spiritual energy repeats itself. And so too on Yom Kippur, a spiritual energy of forgiveness floods the world on Yom Kippur. Every special date has its own character, and a higher and higher level of that energy comes down each time. So if you want to know what Gimel Tammuz is, you should go straight to the Rebbe. The Rebbe tells us what Gimel Tammuz is. He talked about, it's right in, so the Rebbe gave a talk on Gimel Tammuz, and it's right in, they call them oses. It's the first section. Right in the first section, he explains exactly what Gimel Thomas is. Um, so his father-in-law, as Haskell Shimon said, his father-in-law had been thrown in prison, and it was a horrible imprisonment. They did everything to intimidate him. He emerged out of there. I don't know how he survived. It was like incredible. It was horrible, horrible. If you read any accounts of it, and he was such a gibor. He stood up to them the whole time. Anyway, after they planned to kill him, they definitely planned to kill him because they knew that he was behind. Why did they throw him in jail? Because he was behind in a huge network of hundreds of secret schools in Russia. Because in Russia you could do nothing Jewish. It wasn't against the law, but practically it was totally against the law. It was even against the law to congregate with a bunch of Jews. You couldn't even have a party, a secular party with a bunch of Jews. Everything was against the law. Mikvahs were against the law. Kosher was against the law. Everything was against the law. Jewish weddings were against the law. Brisim were against the law. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, as we said last week, the Frierdiker Rebbe got together he got a group of people, and he said, we are going to, even if it means giving up our lives, we are going to keep Judaism alive. And particularly they cared a lot about Jewish schools, because if the kids don't learn Torah, there will be no adults who know Torah. So anyway, finally the Russians were fed up with him, and they jailed the Frierdiker Rebbe with under debt, and the penalty that they had decided on for him was death. The reason they didn't kill him right away is because they wanted to torture him so that he would tell them the locations and the names of the teachers and the locations of the Jewish schools, and he would not budge. He would not say anything like that. Finally, after a while, people were horrified when they found out that the Russians threw him in prison, and there was a lot of world pressure applied, and they reluctantly commuted his sentence on Gimel Thomas. They said, okay, on Gimel Thomas, they said, okay, you're going to go to exile. You're going to go to exile, and instead of in a far off place in Russia, and and they so anyway, but nobody celebrated Gimel Thomas because he was still under the thumb of the Russians. The Frierdiker Rebbe was still under their thumb, and they could change their mind at any second. They could kill him at any second because he was still under their authority. He was supposed to be there for first it was 10 years, then 3 years, and then they let him out 10 days later, they let him out completely. He was completely freed. And the Rebbe explains that in hindsight, so people didn't know, is Gimel Thomas a good day or not? He's being exiled. We don't know if it's good or not. We don't know if he's going to survive it. We don't know anything about it. We don't know their plans. And maybe they're just going to, fake kill him, like they're not allowed to kill him outright, like with a firing squad. Who knows what they're going to do with him in exile? But then when they released him on the 13th, the 12th and 13th of Tammuz, the Rebbe said it became clear in hindsight that Gimel Tammuz was the beginning of the redemption. Those are the words that the Rebbe uses. That he's okay. I'm going to read it. Az ka'asher hischarer legamre. When they let him go completely, this gala, it was revealed, Eich shegimel Tammuz haya hischalta de geula. It became revealed how Gimel Tammuz was the beginning of the redemption. But it's the kind of beginning, as the Rebbe explains, it wasn't understood right away that Gimel Tammuz was the beginning of the redemption. It was only clear from hindsight. So let's apply it to our times. Gimel Tammuz is the beginning of the redemption, but it's the type of beginning that will only be clear from hindsight.
So in other words, you didn't say that he said it was the beginning of the redemption. I got confused.
He said he did.
Okay.
Nobody said, but it was only understood in hindsight after he was completely released. That releasing him from prison was it was the first step of the Geula. It was a good thing, And so the Rebbe, in the Rebbe's own words, Gimel Tamas Hayasah Chalta de Geula. Gimel Tamas is what is its nature? The beginning of the redemption, but it's the kind of beginning that will not be understood until it will only be understood in hindsight. So, so anyway, to go back to today's topic, which is how do you handle somebody how do you love somebody who drives you crazy? So I think that the answer, there are practical answers, like usually two different kinds of people drive you crazy. Either they have your faults, but they have it's magnified. They're a caricature of you that can drive a person crazy. That's why parents are often very hard on a particular parent is very hard on the kid that reminds them most of their faults. The kid who has the
Right.
faults they have, if that kid has it, they're extremely hard on that kid, not on the other kids, but on that kid. And so 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 or you're very mad at somebody who is like totally not like you. And I would never do such a thing to a person. I don't understand how they think they can do that. How do they think they can? I would never do such things. So the secret to the secret to at least the second one is if you look at the person impartially, you'll see, okay, they're doing this very different from what I would do. But you know what? They react to everything differently than I would react. They're not on the same wavelength. They're like, maybe I'm a more gentle person and they're more of a powerhouse or something like that. And so they're not going to react to things the way that I do. Why do I judge them according to my standards? Hashem made them so differently. They need their strengths. They need to be who they are, and I need to be who I am. And they're not going to react to things like I am because they're not me. So there are answers like that, and there are answers but I think the only answer really, the big answer is what the Rebbe said, that the preparation for the Frierdiker Rebbe to become Rebbe, and the preparation for all of us, is to know the intense pleasure that it gives Hashem when we love each other, when we treat each other with love and respect. And if we remember that the Jews did a lot of different things wrong, but why was the second Beis Hamikdash destroyed? The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed for one reason, because we didn't have love for each other. We didn't express love for each other. So Hashem is that Father who is waiting for this is what he's waiting for. This is what Hashem, he, she, whatever you want to call Hashem. This is what Hashem is waiting for. Hashem is waiting for us to show complete love for each other, to shrink the other Jews' faults down to the small letters, and to magnify their good qualities like the large letters. This is what Hashem wants. This is what Hashem is waiting for, and he's ready to give us a treasure house of good if we would only do it. So anyway, I'm going to end with that, and I'm going to turn off the recording and ask if anybody has any questions. And thank you so much for joining. Oop. Here we go. Okay.